Thank you for tuning in and welcome back to the Sandwich of Coherency. So let's just go ahead and jump right into this and catch up on this past week and such, and things that we may have missed that seem like we should probably talk about them. And a lot of it we should talk about because it's dealing with what's really coming up to be important, which is the midterm elections. And the fact that, well, it seems like the Democrats are still on this warpath to basically bar and prevent many Republicans from being able to run or even hold office. It seems a little crazy in my opinion. And I say this because there's such a huge effort, okay? Understand there's a huge campaign to prevent Republicans from being able to run for office. Now, according to the Democrats, their policies are great. Everything that they want to do is so great and every American loves it. This is what they're saying. Most Americans, I guess, believe this and want this, is what they're constantly screaming. But yet there's this fear campaign that seems to be in their minds because, well, they seem to be so worried about the opposition being able to win that they want to keep them from being able to run. And to me, that seems a little off the cuff there. We've seen this before. Many regimes in the past. When you have a constant campaign to basically suppress the opposition, something is wrong in your party. Such as such used to be the case as in Singapore. And more or less they publicly said they did. I don't know if I could say so much that was the case afterwards, if they actually really did it, but they more or less said they ended their campaign to suppress the speech of their opposition parties. And it's interesting to note that in the suppression of the opposition in Singapore, you had the Financial Times, Bloomberg News, and many American publications actually involved in it, to the point that they were sued and lost. Now, we look at it from this side and we see it in other places and we say, oh my gosh, that is terrible. How could that happen? But it's so saturated amongst us here, we don't even notice it happening. And if we do notice, many people either say it's no big deal, it doesn't affect me, or you get people who say, well, yes, it has to be done. I mean, one way or another, we have to get it done. Our side has to win. Sometimes you have to lie in order to get that across. It's the idea that they want you to believe. And when I say that, I want to bring into account a few things. Now, all this stems from what happened during the 2020 elections, and you have the Democrats saying that anyone that had any involvement in this insurrection, as they call it, needs to be barred from holding office. And they ran many lawsuits. Or they are running many. Some still currently going at this moment. Some have failed. Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina, he lost his case. But Marjorie Taylor Greene won hers. But I want to go back to an article in The Conversation from May 9th. And it's titled Forgotten Insurrection Clause of 14th Amendment Used to Force GOP Members of Congress to Defend Their Actions of January 6th. And I'm just going to skip through a couple parts because I want to get down to the portion of Marjorie Taylor Greene and, how this really explains what we can really look at going forward to these elections coming up. So apparently lawyers representing voters in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina have filed lawsuits alleging that their elected congressional representatives are barred from running for future office based on a little-known provision of the 14th Amendment. Specifically, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment reads, "No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress who, having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof." So long story short, the proponents of barring these representatives from running for re-election argue that their active support for those who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 qualifies as involvement in insurrection or rebellion against the United States government. Now, what do they mean exactly? They're not talking about, oh, they told them to storm it and all this and all that. No. What they're saying is that the simple fact that they encourage people to go to D.C., to voice themselves, to protest. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But what they're saying is that because there are people that apparently some got violent, it seems, not much was it provoked, can't say, but I'm not going to go down that route. The fact of the matter is that, yes, people did storm into the Capitol building, is what they're saying. And that's what we're going with. So based on that, they're saying that because they encourage people to come to D.C., they are guilty of those people storming into the Capitol. That is the logic that they're giving here. By encouraging people to voice themselves in legal protest. Granted, there were some that protested violently, okay? Because there were some violent outliers in this, they're saying that they are responsible for that. I repeat that because it's going to come into play here in a second. Let's read this next part. The case against Representative Greene of Georgia provides a useful lens through which to analyze this unique constitutional claim. The challenge to her candidacy came to an end on May 5th when a Georgia state judge, Charles Boudreaux Jr., ruled that Greene should remain on the ballot because lawyers challenging Greene's run failed to prove that she engaged in insurrection on January 6, 2021. The evidence in this matter is insufficient to establish that Representative Greene engaged in insurrection or rebellion under the 14th Amendment. That's what he wrote in his ruling. So, it's based off, things that she said, okay? Such as, she frequently referred to the protest effort against the 2020 election as our 1776 movement. That reference is what lawyers argued is a clear allusion to indeed, quote unquote, code for a violent overthrow of the existing government. Now, it is in the Constitution that you do have the right to overthrow the government if the government is no longer working for the people. I mean, hell, I know many people saw National Treasure, pardon the Constitution is part of it. But, I mean, But that's where we're at. I'm sorry, I'm trying to hide my internal laughter about all of this. Because again, bring this back to the part about the rhetoric. See, if their argument is that, well, you told people to protest, those protests went this way, that means you're responsible for those people that went that way. Okay, so let's think. During the lockdowns of the pandemic, we had protests nationwide. We had violence nationwide because of these protests. Now, here's an interesting thing. Now, granted, these may not have been, well, be careful with that one. So what I'll say is that people did come protest. You had politicians, the squad, the now Vice President Kamala Harris. You had all these very Democrat politicians, Lori Lightfoot, Nancy Pelosi, her nephew, Gavin Newsom. Many of them all coming out. Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, calling for protest. Calling for people to go out in the streets on behalf of Black Lives Matter. And such other nonsense. They encourage these people to go out and protest. They encourage them to do it so much that they set up bail relief funds, and they encouraged Americans to donate to these funds to get these people that they encouraged to come out and protest out of jail immediately. People died. You have to understand these protests got violent. Billions of dollars of property damage. Okay? And the interesting thing about it is when you watch all the news clips, you watch the videos of these things happening. Where were they happening primarily? Mostly in Democrat-led areas. Again, they're to convince them to destroying their own homes. These are the policies. This is what they caused. So the point I'm saying is that if their idea is that if you encourage people to come out and peacefully protest, and those protests have any kind of negative actions happen, you are responsible for that. I say that because they encouraged the nonsense that happened during those protests throughout that entire year, that makes them responsible. It might not be counted as an insurrection, but I would say it is quite a violation of their office. And when you had people attacking federal buildings, federal courthouses, attempting to destroy them and set them on fire with people still inside, and you have politicians coming out and saying that these are peaceful protests, this is nothing to be worried about, and then bail those people out of jail for that, I would say you're just as responsible. And that in itself might not be counted. That's not an insurrection. No. But it is a complete violation of their office. It is a violation of the oath that they took and the position that they hold. It is an egregious act of disdain for their own constituents. And the idea of wanting to virtue signal, they put the people that vote for them in jeopardy. So I don't know. It just seems quite off the cuff to me. And as we move closer to these elections, it's going to get worse. You're going to have more and more and more of this. And certain things will be moved out of the media. You won't see or hear them as much. Such as protests outside of Supreme Court Judge homes. That didn't just go away. That didn't just stop. They're just not talking about it as much. Why? Because it gathered national attention. People now are paying attention to it. You have politicians calling for action because it is illegal. And the problem that people don't understand about this is that protest out of a judge's home or witnesses' homes or outside of the jurors' homes, if anything dealing with a court case or something like that, that actually mars the court case. That whatever decision that comes from that will be able to be challenged, and you can be guaranteed that the challenge will win. So, okay, you're protesting outside the Supreme Court judges' homes as you are unhappy with what you have heard about what they will be probably deciding on the issue of Roe versus Wade. Okay, you protest outside their homes. You're attempting to sway the decisions of the judges that are making the decision. Now, if that's the case and that happens, can that be challenged? Yes. And will that challenge win? Yes. And guess what? You will end up right back in the same spot you began in. And the process will begin all over again. So, and you have people like Schumer and other politicians encouraging these people to protest outside the Supreme Court justices' homes. That is a complete violation of their office. They're encouraging people to break the law. That is a complete issue in my book. So I'm just saying, as we move closer to these elections, please be aware, because it's not going to be a beautiful sight. Some people are saying we're moving closer towards something of a civil war in the United States. I don't know. I wouldn't go as far as to say that. I like to think that we are still civil in this nation, but things are really falling apart. Things are really falling apart. And this comes down to this idea of this Green New Deal we're having. People don't understand. We've seen we've seen this before in previous regimes. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Sandwich of Coherency. If you'd like to hear the full podcast episode, you can find us on thesandwichofcoherency.com. Link will be down in the description.